Today, we have an international author, an award-winning speaker, a host, all the way from United States. It's not easy to be successful in life. And this person that I'm going to introduce today has gone through the ups and the downs in life. And today we're going to learn a lot of lessons directly from the host. Let me invite and welcome Mistie Layne. Hi, Mistie.
Hi.
Welcome on board.
Thank you, Farookh. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Mistie, as I mentioned right now in the introduction, it's not easy to be successful. Today you are known for what you do as an author, as a speaker, and as a change agent. Where did your life start? And what was the down in your life? We want to learn from the down because when you are down, that's where we learn a lot of lessons. It's not on top. When you're on the top, there are more chances that you can spoil yourself. But when you're on the downs, deep down, there is nobody around you. It's very dark. It's asking questions to yourself, what we call as the penetrating questions. Start from the dark of your life.
Well, my dark was extremely dark, and not only dark, it was also very lonely. I could be in a room full of people and feel completely alone. My battle, and Farookh, I talk about transparency because it is my own transparency is what has brought me out of the darkness. Being able to live with my own mistakes, being able to live with my own pain, being able to forgive myself as well as forgive others. And that was a hard journey for me to learn how to get through and move through those steps. So today I talk about transparency and show people that we can overcome our worst to live our best. My dark hour came from, I ended up in prison. I wanted to be a surgeon since I was 13 years old. I worked really hard in school to become a doctor. I did everything right. I got married to my college sweetheart. We had 2 little babies. Finally, I graduated college with 3 degrees. I have a chemistry degree, psychology degree, and a nuclear medicine degree. And I applied to get into medical school, and I got accepted. And just shortly after getting in, I found out my husband of 10 years had a woman pregnant. And I mean, it just devastated me. It completely floored me. Growing up in the Texas beauty pageant system, I had a lot of self-confidence. I was a very powerful individual. Even from young, I was always very driven. And so when this happened to me, I immediately blamed myself, Farookh. And I thought, this must be my fault. I'm not good enough. I wasn't pretty enough. I wasn't smart enough. Whatever made him cheat, it was my fault. I left him, went into a really deep depression, and took a year off. I took it's called a deferment from medical school. They save your spot for a year. Unfortunately, I never returned. During that year is when my dark hours started. I met and fell in love with cocaine for the first time in my life at 32 years old. I don't blame anyone else, and that's very, very crucial. I want to say that again. I do not blame anyone but myself. It was my choice alone to do that first line of cocaine. I might have been in a vulnerable part of my life, but taking full accountability for our actions is step one. Step one to our healing and getting through our journey to healness and prosperity and loving life again. So I started that dark journey with cocaine, and that cocaine turned into a crack cocaine addiction. Now, mind you, I'm 32. I have 2 little babies. Never was on drugs, never did drugs. Actually had been hit by a drunk driver when I was 15. So I was anti-drug. But I tried that. I made that poor choice. So if, those of you listening, respect those moments of choice because they do become your lifetime of decisions. I didn't respect that choice. I did that cocaine, and it was the escape that I got addicted to. I don't think it was the drug so much. It was the escape it provided me. I've always been a really high-strung person, and it just slowed me down, let my brain kind of just wander off, and it wasn't constantly racing. So it was that's what I got addicted to, that escape from reality. That addiction was horrific. I ended up with my drug dealer. Again, thought I was in love. And that's my son's. My son is now 20. I have 3 children, and that is his dad. He does not have a relationship with him. That's his choice. He makes his choice with that. It's kind of a really long story, but I'm gonna plunge right in. It took me down. It took me down to a dark place, and today I can talk about it. For years, I hid behind the shame. I hid behind the guilt of the things I'm about to share with you, because I am all about transparency. So I am going to share with you openly and honestly right here, right now. I had abortions, never dealt with the grief of aborting a child, much less more than one. Shoved it down with food, shoved it down with the cocaine, and just kept ticking along, pretending that things were okay. My new husband, my drug dealer husband, hit me for the first time, broke my nose. I'd never been around domestic abuse. I do have a book, as you mentioned, What Goes Up.
Yeah.
And one of the chapters is Never Say Never, because I used to be that person that not outwardly judged women with black eyes, but, part of me would think to myself, well, what's wrong with her? Doesn't she know that isn't love? Just leave him. Well, until you're in that position, you have no idea the power that these manipulators play. They take every insecurity that we have and they play on it. And I was trapped. He would use the drug as he would keep me captive basically with the drug. And I tried to get away from him. I tried to get away from the drug. I went to rehab after rehab. I prayed. I, made a bargain with God. I did everything I knew to do, and nothing was working for me. Unfortunately, there was a life-changing event for me. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, doing the wrong things with the wrong people. 2 girls decided they were going to attack and rob me because they saw me as a target. I was, green on the streets, as they call it. And I lost control of my vehicle, started sliding down the road sideways. I ran into a car that was parked in a house driveway, and that car in turn struck a woman that was standing in her yard, and it knocked her into the house and it killed her. So the next thing I remember, now I had been up for 4 days straight smoking crack. I hadn't slept. I was in another place, in and out of consciousness. What I remember, Farookh, is waking up, opening my eyes to my mother just hovered over me, bawling, crying her eyes out. And I looked up and I said, Mama, I'm okay. I didn't get hurt. I think I'm okay. I knew I had a wreck. And she's like, baby, don't you know what's happened? And I said, no, I'm okay though. Let's go home. I want to go home to my son. And I went to lift my hands up to hug my mother, and I felt that cold, angry steel handcuff around me, and I was chained to the bed. And that's when I knew something horrible had happened. And my mother is the one that had to tell me, you've just killed someone. And it is if that hospital gurney was quicksand and I was just sinking and all the air was squeezing out of my lungs. I couldn't breathe. I felt guilty for a breath that I took because I felt I shouldn't have been the one that lived. I was the one in the wrong. So I ended up in jail. I got hit with a vehicular homicide charge, which carries a 40-year prison sentence. So here I am going from medical school to sitting in a jail facing a 40-year term. And I thought my life was over. I completely gave up. I've never been suicidal, but it took a lot every day to get up and function, to breathe, to take a shower, to have any kind of hope or anything in me. I thought it was over. My kids were going to be without their mom forever, and it was over. So it's really a beautiful story. There's so many little intricate facets here that come into play. My oldest daughter, like I mentioned, I have 3 children. Lauren is my oldest, Amber is my second, and Austin is my third. And there's a 9-year gap between the last 2. My oldest daughter, I had just missed her high school graduation because I was incarcerated. And she wrote to me and she said, Mama, You have to forgive yourself. This was an accident.
Yeah.
You need to write everything down that keeps you awake at night. All those things that you've done that haunt you, you need to pray on it, give it away, and let it go. So I took my my daughter, who is now mothering me, her very wise advice. And what that did for me, Farookh, is it let down that wall of shame just enough so that I could see that I was hurting inside. I could see that there was pain, that I was using that drug to cover up. The domestic abuse, the perfectionism, the being overweight, battling with a food addiction, the abortion issue. There were all these things that I never addressed and I never got help with. So that's when I decided to start writing my story. And I sat down with the pen and paper. It took me 7 months and I wrote my story. It just kind of flowed out.
And you were still in the prison at that time?
I was still in jail awaiting my sentencing. Because it takes a long time. It took about a year for me to go in front of the judge to get sentenced on my charge. So I'm in a county jail. I hadn't gone to prison yet. I was in a county jail at this time with the 2 girls, I might add, that attacked and assaulted me. And that was a challenge as well. One of the young ladies, her mom started prostituting her at 12 years old to support her crack addiction. So she was a product of her environment. She didn't even have a chance in life. And she was very remorseful. I actually helped her get her GED. I brought her to the Bible. She and I forgave each other. We just bonded. I've learned since she's passed away. She did die of a heroin overdose a few years later. But it's important to know that even enemies, if you will, if you open your heart and you open your mind to forgiveness, anything could happen, anything.
Yeah.
And she and I resolved and got closure with each other over that incident. The district attorney, which is the prosecutor, came to see me. I think that a couple of the jail guards or the nurse, I'm not sure exactly who it is, but someone made mention of the book I was writing to the district attorney's office. Wow. They came to visit me, which is unheard of. You don't get to speak to your prosecutor.
Yeah.
And he just kind of flipped through the pages and talked to me. And he said, Mistie, you don't belong here. And I said, yes, I do. I said, I do belong here because I've killed someone. He said, yes, you've done the crime, but what has happened to your life? And he said, we're going to try to get you some help and make this right. So they reduced the charge from vehicular homicide, which carried a 40-year sentence, to negligent, which is accidental, which is what it was, homicide, which carries a 5-year sentence. It also goes from a violent crime to a nonviolent crime. And that's the true blessing here, because that saved my nuclear medicine license. Because it is not a violent crime, I am still able today to practice nuclear medicine. That's a blessing. So I did 2.5 years in prison. I got the maximum sentence of 5, did 2.5 in prison, came out, did the rest on paper, my parole and probation. 9 years went by, didn't do anything with my book. Too ashamed, because I was like a cat. They say cats, you throw a cat and they land on their feet upright all the time.
Yeah.
I'm like a cat. It's like I always land back on my feet every time. I get a job, I get my life back, my family forgives me. I'm truly blessed in that way. They're always right there to help me pick my pieces up. So I was able to rebuild a life for myself because I still had that career in play. It took some time. I have many felonies on my record. And so it did take some time for those to drop off, for hospitals to want to employ me. I'm always honest with them when I walk in the door and told them up front. I never tried to hide anything. And that gets you a long way when you're honest with a prospective employer.
Exactly.
So I'm rebuilding my life 9 years later, hadn't done anything with my book. And my daughter, Lauren, comes to me and says she's pregnant with my very first grandchild.
Wow. Okay.
Now, the wreck happened on September the 18th. I married my 2 daughters' dad on September the 18th. Same date, same different year. Now she tells me she's due with my first grandchild on September the 18th. So I'm thinking, okay, this is a life replacing a life, continuity, things keep going.
Yep.
Eliana, which is my grandbaby, who has now passed away. She passed away this past January. She was born that day got stuck in the birth canal and suffered a very serious brain injury from a lack of oxygen. She came out blind and deaf. She couldn't suck. She couldn't cry. She had a feeding tube, couldn't hold her body temperature, just a plethora of issues. And I felt, Farookh, because she was born on the same exact day, that it was my fault. I actually convinced myself that that was my punishment for all the wrongdoings. And I had to take a step back and really look at that and say, first of all, the God that I know doesn't love like that. And secondly, I had remembered when I was in a rehab, they had said only 3% of us would ever make it through a drug addiction, through crack cocaine addiction. And I realized I was standing there 9 years, never looking back, never touching a drug again, a 3%er, and that I was strong and that I must have lived through all of that for a reason, that God wanted me to use that experience to help people. So I took that book that I had written in jail, which was full of anger and blame. It was very dark. And I rewrote it out of a place of accountability and forgiveness. And it changed my life. And I have just never looked back. From that day forward, I have made it God's mission to get out there and speak to people about how, when we're transparent and we come out and admit to ourselves, admit to others about the wrongdoings, that it's such a freedom. And that when we take that negative attention that we're putting on ourselves and constantly putting ourselves down and beating ourselves up, if we convert that attention and that energy to helping someone else, that it lifts us and it's not about us anymore. And so it's just changed my entire world. That's why I started the movement, #BeThatOne, because I encourage people to step up and share their real, honest experiences so that we can educate each other in hopes to judge less and mentor more. And that's my mission today. That's my story. And like I said, the dark years were extremely dark, where I didn't even, taking a breath when I woke up in the morning was a challenge for me at that time of my life.
Wow. Thank you very much for sharing, and thank you very much for being so transparent with us and with our audience in the world around. The second part is, after or while you are in the jail, that's when you found light in writing the book. Though it was a different style of writing the book, after 9 years, then you rechanged and re-edited your book in a different perspective. My question here is, you were not able to see that. You were not able to see that, but it was your daughter who found that in you. There are a lot of people here who are completely in the darkness. They don't know about their strength. They don't know about their potentials. They don't know about the true purpose of why they are here in this world, on this planet. And you found it out with the help of your daughter. What was the change that you brought in the people with that single light?
Well, let me back up for you and shed a little story going into that. Because I always say that my story has two twists, one being my grandbaby being born on the same day and me taking accountability, thinking it was my fault. The second twist is, in the middle of the night, I'm laying in my jail cell, the bars opened up, and a lady came into my cell. She was crying, she was drunk, and she was kind of just spouting off about, she was a lesbian. She was married to a woman. She was spouting off about how she missed her wife. Her wife was dead. She had cancer. She had been suicidal and was in a lot of pain. And she missed her, but at the same time, she was crying and saying she was really glad she wasn't in pain anymore. So I gave her a T-shirt to wear. It's jail. You know, you have to buy stuff on commissary. So when you come in, you don't have anything. I shared some food with her, and I sat up and talked to her for a couple of hours. We didn't know each other. But I did it, just talked to her. The next morning, the bars opened up and we all went to eat breakfast where all the general population meets together. And everyone's pointing and whispering at us. And someone finally hollered out, "That's the lady that killed your wife." And she looked at me and she said, "You killed her?" And I looked at her and I said, "She had cancer? She was suicidal?" So what that did, and it's my belief that was orchestrated by a higher power. First of all, she should have never been allowed even in the same unit as me. That's a threat to my life right there. But she got in somehow. The fact she came in the middle of the night where there was no one else awake to tell her who I was, she didn't prejudge me. So the word on the street by those two girls was that I ran the lady down in a drug deal because they didn't want to get charged with attacking me. So they put that fake lie out there. So all this time she thought her wife had been involved in some kind of a drug deal. So what this did for us is it gave her closure to know it was a total accident. And it gave me, Farookh, remember I told you it was really hard for me to even take a breath because I felt so guilty for being alive.
Yeah.
It gave me that tiny, tiny little thread of hope to say to myself, okay, yes, what you've done is horrific. You've killed someone, but she was suicidal. And by you taking her life and not her, my belief is that I just saved her soul. She's in heaven. And that is what I built on day after day after day. And when that happened for me, it gave me enough strength to start writing. When I started writing my story, other women in the jail, they were curious. They wanted to know what I was writing about all that time. And I would just tell them, I'm just writing the thoughts that are coming out of my head. And when I first sat down, nothing came out. It took 2 or 3 days for that pen to start moving on the paper. But once it did, it just flowed out of me, like almost like emotional vomit, if you will. And so what it did is it sparked an interest in writing for some of the other inmates as well. And I showed them how they could use writing to help save their lives too. Just if nothing else, writing a letter to themselves, just to forgive themselves or just admitting to themselves things they had done.
Wow. What are the 5 advice? Normally I ask for 3, but I would like to know 5 advice. Not from the dark side. I'm looking for the future. People who are dark and they want to go into the future. Now you have ample experience coming from the dark and now shedding the lights to millions of people around the world. Your experience as a successful person, what would be the 5 things that you would like to share with us?
Well, I'm going to start out again with transparency because I think that's the gateway into that journey from the dark. That's the bridge that gets you from the dark to the light. I think to give advice not to procrastinate. If you have something in your heart you want to accomplish and you want to do, don't let fear keep you back. Don't let fear hold you down. Just take that jump and do it. Just get out there and do it. I held off on starting my show because I wanted it to be perfect. I have a perfectionism issue. So months went by and the show never started. And finally, through coaching, I realized, others coaching me, I realized it's never going to be perfect. Just jump and do it. And I'm so thankful I did. And I would say also, keep gratefulness in your heart. Always be grateful for what you have, but always reach for more. Always try to be better every day. I would also say to respect others' opinions and viewpoints, because not everyone's going to align with what you do. Not everyone is going to be your fan. But just respect. Don't talk down or don't try to convince otherwise. Just respect. And then I would say the last thing, which is really important as well, is listen more and talk less. Listen more and talk less, because I believe I'm always a talker. I've got plenty to say, but it's a learning process for me as well, that when I stop talking and I listen, there's a lot of wisdom out there. There's a lot of knowledge that we can learn if we just slow down and take the time to listen to others.
Wow, that's so powerful. 5 lessons. Number 1, you got to be transparent. You got to be transparent to yourself, and you got to be transparent to the person that you are having a communication or conversation. Number 2, you spoke about 2 extremes, never to be perfect and never be procrastinating. You got to go forward. And sometimes you need a coach. That's what you said. You require a coach, because everybody needs a coach, because it's a coach that would identify your potential, your hidden strength within you. Be grateful. What a powerful. Be grateful. Every single day when we wake up, we have to be grateful for what we are and what we do. Such a powerful. Ladies and gentlemen, Mistie Layne.